The desert sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the rusted wreckage scattered around the small, makeshift repair yard. Heat shimmered off the dunes like an invisible veil. Jack wiped a greasy hand across his brow, squinting toward the horizon where the light turned the sand gold. The wind carried fine grains that crept into every joint, every crevice of the old tool stacked beside him. His daughter's voice broke through the silence. "Dad, the water tank's dripping again." Jack sighed. "I'll patch it. Again." He tossed a spanner into a dented toolbox and stood, his knees popping audibly. His shirt clung to his back, soaked from the heat, and the ache in his shoulders never seemed to ease any more. Lila was perched on an overturned crate, legs swinging, a hand stitched all tucked beneath her arm. At 8, she had her mother's eyes, wide, watchful, and a little too knowing. "We should build a dome over the shack," she offered cheerfully. "Then we could catch condensation and maybe grow lettuce." Jack managed a small smile. "You want salad now?" "Salad or strawberries?" Her grin widened. "Strawberries and ice cream." Jack chuckled, but there was something hollow behind the sound. "Well, tell you what, if a strawberry spaceship crashes here, we'll ask them to trade." The desert was unkind to dreamers, but Lila hadn't learned that yet. The days stretched on. Jack scavenged, repaired, soldered, nothing that would earn enough credits for even a synthetic meal kit, let alone fresh fruit. Yet he worked anyway, because she needed him to, because doing something felt better than sitting with the weight of failure. Late afternoon brought a tremor to the air, a low hum rising into a mechanical whine. Jack paused mid-weld, his instincts twitching. A shadow passed overhead. He stepped outside the shelter, shielding his eyes. The vessel that descended wasn't any desert transport he recognized. Sleek, angular, polished even after its rough descent. It didn't crash so much as it landed in distress, its rear thrusters sputtering, landing gear scraping awkwardly against the sand. Jack reached for the plasma cutter, just in case. Lila was already halfway to the site before he could stop her. "Lila," he shouted. "Wait." She turned, grinning. "It's a ship. A real ship." He caught up and stood between her and the vessel as its hatch hissed open. A ramp unfolded with smooth, practiced elegance. The figure who stepped out made him freeze. She was tall, slender, and, he blinked, shimmering. Her skin glinted with pearlescent hue, faintly violet in the sun, though the features were unmistakably humanoid. Her hair was long and silver blonde, cascading in waves down her back. Her eyes, large and luminous, scanned the desert as if it were an ancient painting. "Greetings," she said. Her voice was soft, composed, but her stance suggested fatigue. "I appear to have broken something." Jack's grip on the cutter loosened. She didn't seem armed. No escort, no insignia. Just an elegant stranger in the middle of nowhere. "I noticed," he muttered. "I was hoping to reach the city port," she continued, stepping lightly onto the sand. "But my stabilizers failed during atmospheric entry. I must have overloaded the shielding." Jack raised a brow. "You were flying a ship like that by yourself?" She blinked, as if not used to being questioned. "Yes, I am traveling to understand other cultures, without escorts." Lila stared, mouth open. "Are you a real alien?" The woman smiled gently. "I suppose I am. Though where I'm from, you'll be the alien." Jack lowered the cutter. "You're lucky you didn't land in a pirate zone, or get incinerated. You're a long way from safe space." "I've read that the desert peoples value resilience and hospitality," she said carefully. "I had hoped it might extend to ship repairs." Jack snorted. "Hospitality doesn't pay for fuel cells." "I can offer barter," she said quickly. "Rare alloys, compact tech components." "I didn't bring currency. That would defeat the purpose of anonymity." Anonymity. Right. Jack glanced back at his shop, then at Lila, who was staring at the woman like she'd stepped out of a bedtime story. There was no one else for miles, and if he said no, she'd either roast or get picked up by the kind of salvagers who didn't ask questions before gutting ships, and passengers. He exhaled through his nose. "Fine. I'll look. No promises." But if it's a complete reactor failure, you're out of luck. Her expression softened, grateful. Thank you. That means a great deal. Lila bounced beside her. What's your name? The woman paused. Nix, she said. Just Nix. Jack squinted at her again. Something about the name sounded rehearsed, but he let it slide. They returned to the workshop. The ship's damage wasn't as bad as Jack had expected. Some external plating melted, a few systems overloaded. Complex, but nothing he couldn't handle. While he worked, Nix knelt nearby, offering tools without being asked, watching closely. You don't talk much, Jack said finally. I observe, she replied. You're quite efficient. I've had practice. She tilted her head. And yet you live here, alone, with a child. Jack didn't answer. Lila filled the silence. Dad used to fly freighters. Before Mom got sick, then we came here. Nix looked at Jack, her gaze unreadable. I'm sorry. Jack just kept working. Sparks flew. The smell of hot metal filled the air. As dusk approached, Nix wandered briefly to a ridge, watching the twin moons rise above the dunes. Jack stood beside her after finishing the first round of diagnostics. You sure you're just a tourist? He asked, half joking. She smiled faintly. Is that hard to believe? Most tourists don't pilot high-end cruisers solo through fringe zones. Most people, she said softly, don't live with such dignity in dust and heat, expecting nothing. Jack looked at her sideways. That's supposed to be a compliment? It's an observation. They stood in silence a moment longer. The wind picked up, and Nix pulled her silken shawl tighter around her arms. Jack turned back toward the ship. I'll start early tomorrow. She'll fly again, might take a few days. I'm grateful, she said again. Truly. Back in the shelter, Lila had made them all tea from their dwindling herbal stash. She handed Nix a cup like a tiny hostess. The woman accepted it with a nod, then sat beside the girl on the crate. Is your world very different from this one? Lila asked. Nix took a sip, smiling. Yes, much colder, and there are towers of light so tall they pierce clouds. That sounds amazing. Nix looked down at her. It is, but there's something peaceful here I've never found among all that glass and steel. Jack, standing near the doorway, met her gaze just briefly. He wasn't sure who she was, but she hadn't lied yet, and maybe that was enough. For now, night crept over the desert, and the stars blinked to life one by one. The stranger stayed, and the mechanic kept his questions to himself. Somewhere in the sky, unknown ships traveled paths drawn by wealth and power, but down here, in a forgotten stretch of sand, a father fixed a ship for nothing. Unaware, he just cracked open the door to a future far larger than the desert horizon. And Nix, the woman who had everything, sat beside the child with dust on her heels and silence in her throat, wondering, perhaps for the first time, if being seen without a name was more valuable than being known with one. By morning, the sun had already begun to bake the sand into a pale glare that made everything shimmer with mirage-like motion. Jack stood bent over Nix's ship, its undercarriage partially exposed, wires like vines snaking out beneath cracked plating. The hull was sleeker than anything he'd worked on, with tech layers far beyond the standard Federation models. He didn't say much as he worked, but Nix watched him closely, her presence a quiet echo in the heat. She handed him tools without being asked. Jack noticed, but didn't comment. Most passengers didn't bother to learn the names of wrenches or recognize when a circuit needed to be cleaned. She moved with precision, her fingers unshaken by the sharpness of metal or the tang of coolant. Not a tourist. Not really. But she never volunteered more than he asked. Lila flitted between the ship and their shelter, carrying small things, humming quietly to herself. She had taken to Nix quickly. Too quickly, maybe, but Jack couldn't bring himself to discourage it. There was no malice in the woman, just layers of silence she wore like armor, and Lila's joy was a scarce enough thing. Your diagnostics are clean, Jack said, kneeling beside the open hatch. But you blew out a power coupler during descent. I can patch it, but I'll need to improvise a housing. Nix crouched beside him. Can you replicate the function without compromising integrity? Jack looked at her. Most people just ask, will it fly? She offered a faint smile. Will it fly? Yes, he muttered, returning to the wiring. Eventually, the sun climbed higher, but the tension between them never did. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was like working beside someone who understood the need for quiet. He appreciated that. At midday, they took a break in the shade of the shelter. Nick sat cross-legged, her posture perfect despite the crude surroundings. She didn't eat, at least not when they did. Jack offered her a protein bar, and she declined with a graceful shake of her head. I've seen your hand before, he said abruptly. They're not clumsy. You fix things. I've studied ship architecture, she replied, for curiosity's sake. Curiosity is a rare motive. Most people study for profit. Not all of us want more credits, she said softly. Some want understanding. Jack leaned back, squinting at her. You sound like someone who's had enough of the first and never got the second. Nix didn't answer, but something flickered in her expression. Regret, maybe, or fatigue. Later, while Jack cut and reshaped a piece of scrap metal to replace a fuse casing, Lila and Nix wandered toward the dunes. Jack watched them go, tension rising instinctively in his gut, but Lila's laughter rang out across the sand, clear and unharmed. They returned an hour later with smooth stones and sun-bleached bones. Lila had insisted they build a sculpture, a desert creature with wings, and Nix helped, arranging the parts with unexpected delicacy. She's not like other grown-ups. Lila said when Nix stepped away for water, she listens without fixing things. She's not from here, Jack said. Lila tilted her head. Neither are you really. Jack blinked. The child saw too much. That evening, Nix lingered by the fire pit Jack had built from salvaged alloy. They sat on opposite sides, silence between them again. But this time, it felt less like distance and more like truce. My daughter talks about you like you're a fairy tale, Jack said, eyes on the flames. Part of me thinks that's dangerous. Nix looked at him. Because she believes in people? Because not all people deserve belief. She believes in you. He didn't answer. Didn't know how. I lost someone, he said finally, voice low. A long time ago now. My wife. Lila was just a baby. We left the freighter routes because I couldn't raise her around that kind of risk. Came here. It was supposed to be temporary. But you stayed. Jack nodded. Had to. Couldn't afford to move again. People don't talk about how expensive hope is. Nix leaned forward slightly. And yet, you still gave me yours. You fixed my ship without a guarantee of payment. He shrugged. Didn't do it for hope. Did it because my kid was watching. She studied him. That's integrity. Most people don't have that anymore. Most people aren't being watched by an 8-year-old philosopher. Nix smiled, the firelight danced in her eyes, and for the first time, Jack saw something beneath the poise, a weariness so deeply embedded it seemed older than she was. He stood. I'll finish the coupling tomorrow. You should rest. She hesitated, then asked, Do you believe people can be more than they pretend to be? Jack looked down at her. I think most people pretend because they're afraid they won't be accepted as they are. And you? I don't have time to pretend. Nix watched him go. Alone, she turned her gaze upward. Stars were beginning to appear. She recited something quietly in her own language, an old prayer, or perhaps a promise. Then she lay down on the sand beside the dying fire, the heat still radiating off the stones. In the distance, beyond the horizon, unseen by both of them, a signal pinged through the void. A data burst flagged by an algorithm buried deep in Nix's vessel. Delayed but finally transmitted. A location. A confirmation. Nix didn't know it yet, but her days of anonymity were running out. And Jack, already tangled in the gravity of her hidden past, would soon have to choose between a life he built and a future neither of them had dared imagine. Morning returned with crispness unusual for the desert. The air, holding a brief chill before the sun, resumed its dominion. Jack was already elbow deep in the undercarriage of Nix's ship, tightening the last of the improvised coupling mount. The device hummed softly, stable, responsive. Against the odds, he had managed to make her ship flight-worthy again. Nick stood nearby, arms folded, observing without interrupting. Her gaze flicked from his hands to the vessel's systems and back again. Jack couldn't shake the feeling she was memorizing every adjustment, every weld. "It'll hold," he said, brushing metal shavings off his coveralls. "Not pretty, but functional." She stepped forward, kneeling beside him to run a slender hand across the housing. "You exceeded expectation." He smirked. That's what mechanics in the middle of nowhere are known for. Miracles built from trash. She opened her mouth to speak, but paused, sensing his tone had drifted into bitterness. He stood, brushing sand from his knees. "Try the ignition." Nix ascended the ramp lightly, vanishing inside the cockpit. Moments later, the ship's engines whirred to life. Lights blink in a low, satisfied purr settled over the chassis. Jack crossed his arms, waiting. She emerged with something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Hesitation. "You restored full flight capacity," she said. "More than I hoped." "Well," Jack replied, forcing casualness into his voice, "I don't like leaving problems half-solved." Nick stepped down, gaze locked on him now. "Then you should know this wasn't just about the ship." Jack's frown deepened. "What does that mean?" "I came here under false pretenses." She said it like confession, but not quite apology. "Not to deceive you, exactly, but to understand." "Understand what?" "What it means to be unknown, to be helped not because of power, but in spite of power's absence." Jack blinked, the words slow to settle. "You're saying you let the ship crash? That this was all deliberate?" "No, the malfunction was real, but the decision to travel unguarded, to hide my identity, that was mine." His stomach sank. "So what, your royalty?" A pause. "Worse. I'm a corporate sovereign. Nix Valari, CEO of the Heliones conglomerate." Jack's breath caught. He'd heard that name before, uttered in hushed tones on smuggler channels. Heliones controlled half the trade lanes on the outer rim. Energy, tech, terraforming. Valari was more than CEO. She was a dynasty wrapped in flesh. He stepped back, anger flaring beneath his ribs. "You lied to me." "I withheld," she said softly, "because people see my name before they see me." "And now what?" he snapped. "You leave with your fixed ship and fly back to your empire, while we stay here, boiling water and eating nutrient paste?" Nix took a careful step toward him. "I didn't come to judge you. I came to remember what matters. You think this is a lesson for you?" His voice rose. "My kid's been dreaming about strawberries for 3 years. You played at being helpless, and we let you in because we didn't know better." "You did more than let me in," she said. "You offered humanity when I had none left to give." Jack's fists clenched. "That doesn't change the fact you've been lying." From behind them, a voice interjected. "Dad." Lila stood near the entrance to the shelter, eyes wide, doll clutched to her chest. She looked between the two adults with dawning confusion. Jack's expression softened immediately. "Lila," she looked at Nix. "You're not just Nix?" Nix knelt to her level. "No, little one. My name is longer. My story, too. But everything I shared with you is true." Lila stared, thinking hard. "Does that mean you're going away?" The question hung heavier than any accusation. Nix hesitated. "I have to," she said finally. "There are people looking for me. And now that the ship is working, they will find me soon." "But you don't want to," Lila said quietly. Jack looked at Nix, his jaw tight. "Do you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "This place, it's small, but it feels honest. And I forgot what that felt like." They all stood in silence. The wind picked up, brushing dust across their feet. Then a sharp beep split the air. Jack turned toward the ship. A low-frequency signal buzzed from the comms panel. An automated ping. Nix's face paled. "They're here." She rushed into the cockpit. Jack followed. On the display, a symbol rotated slowly, a beacon from a Helione security ship, still distant but approaching fast. They locked onto the system's ping when the ship came online. Nix said, "I should have disabled it." Jack stared at the screen. "How many on board?" "Likely a full escort squad. Maybe a retrieval team." "Are they coming to rescue you or contain you?" Nix didn't answer. Her hands trembled slightly on the controls. Outside, Lila watched the sky as a faint shimmer appeared, just on the edge of vision, distant but closing. Jack turned to Nix. "You still want to be unknown?" "Yes." "Then I need 10 minutes. She frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm going to make your ship disappear." Nix followed him out, confusion on her face. Jack strode to the supply crates, yanked open a case marked with an old freighter symbol. Inside was a stealth rig, cloaking gear from his days running ghost cargo across war zones. Illegal, outdated, and patched to hell, but still capable of scrambling a ship's ID signal. "You had this the whole time?" Nix asked, stunned. Jack didn't look at her. For emergencies. For ghosts who needed to vanish. She watched as he mounted the emitters, rewired a circuit junction, and bypassed the transponder. Lila stayed close, her hand in Nix's. "You can still leave," Jack said without glancing at her. "No one will know where you went." "What about you? They might question you." "I'm used to being overlooked, and I'll tell them the truth. That I ran." "No," Jack said quietly. "That I was never here." She stepped forward, eyes bright with something unspoken. "I want to give you something. You don't owe us anything." "I do." She reached into a pocket at her waist and pulled out a small, palm-sized device, an encoded chip with Helione's seal. "This contains unrestricted access to a Helione's trading account. Enough to leave the desert. Enough for strawberries. And more." Jack stared at it. "You think you can fix everything with money?" "No, but it's all I can give that doesn't insult what you already gave me." He took it slowly, the weight of it heavier than metal. He looked at her for a long moment, and then, just barely, nodded. The sound of engines grew louder overhead. A dot appeared against the sun, growing larger. Nix turned to Lila, knelt, and pressed something into her small hand. "For when you dream," she whispered. Lila clung to her for a moment, then let go. Nix climbed the ramp. The ship, now cloaked, shimmered and flickered, then began to rise. Within moments, it vanished from sight. By the time the Helione's retrieval ship arrived, Jack was alone, crouched in the sand beside a cold fire pit, wiping his hands on a rag. They asked him about wreckage, about signals, about a woman. He shook his head. "You must have picked up scrap interference. No one's been here in months." They left, unsatisfied but with no evidence. That night, under skies so wide it threatened to swallow them, Lila curled up beside him and asked, "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Jack looked at the stars. Somewhere up there, Nix Valari was no longer anonymous. But maybe, just maybe, she was free. "I think," he said. 6 months passed. The desert remained, unbothered by time, or the lives lived briefly beneath its vast, silent sky. The wind still carved dunes like waves, and the sun remained cruelly indifferent. But change, subtle and rooted, had begun to stir in the dust. Jack's shop had grown. Not by much, just enough to allow a secondary repair bay. Enough that ships now landed by choice, not accident. Word spread through the fringe channels. A human mechanic out on the edge who didn't ask questions, didn't overcharge, and could fix anything short of a dying star. Credits flowed in quietly, not in torrents, but enough to matter. Enough to replace the cracked solar array, to stock real food, to bring in cooling systems at work past noon. Enough that Lila had her strawberries. Not many, not often, but when she bit into the first one, red juice running down her chin, she cried and didn't know why. She still asked about Nix. Not every day, but in the way children carry hope, persistent and without bitterness. Jack would catch her staring at the stars some nights, cradling the small glass prism Nix had left behind. It shimmered faintly in the moonlight, pulsing like a heartbeat when held. Jack never touched it. Some things weren't his to understand. One night, long after the last trader had lifted off, he sat on the ridge overlooking the compound. The fire beside him crackled gently. Lila slept inside, curled beneath a real cotton blanket bought from a passing merchant. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and familiar. He didn't hear the ship at first. The wind masked the hum until it cut through with unnatural silence. Not a Federation engine. Not local. It landed beyond the far dune, hidden from view, but close enough for Jack's pulse to hitch. He rose slowly, old instincts flexing beneath his ribs. He hadn't armed himself in months, but his fingers still found the grip of the pulse wrench clipped at his belt. A shadow emerged from the gloom, tall, composed, walking like she'd never left. Nyx. She wore desert-toned fabric now, simple but elegant, her hair shorter, pulled back tightly. No guards, no entourage, just her. Jack said nothing as she approached. He didn't trust his voice. She stopped a few feet away, eyes on his, waiting. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said finally, rough from disuse. "I didn't think I'd be allowed to," she replied. He studied her. "You left the company." It wasn't a question. She nodded, stepped down, divested shares, transferred power to the board. "That's a lot." "It was necessary." "Why?" She hesitated, then sat beside the fire, the flame painting shadows across her cheek. "Because I couldn't keep pretending. Not after you. Not after here." Jack sat too, slower, warier. "So what are you now?" She smiled faintly. "A traveler. A woman trying to matter without control. That chip you left, it worked." "I know. I tracked the transaction under a proxy ID. You didn't spend it all. Didn't feel right." "It's yours, Jack. Earned. I don't want it back." He nodded slowly. "You could have messaged. I needed to know if I came for you or for what you represented." "And—" She met his eyes. "You." Jack exhaled through his nose, a soft sound of disbelief. "And what happens now? You land, confess, and think the desert will just make space again." "No, I don't expect space. I came to ask." His jaw tensed. "Ask what?" "If I can stay." The question sat heavy between them, but not unwelcome. Jack stared into the fire. "You lied to me." "I did." "You changed our lives." "I hoped I did." He glanced toward the shelter. "Lila asked about you." "I ask about her every night." Jack's voice dropped. "She believed in you." "I did too. That wasn't easy." "I know," she whispered, "but I'll spend as long as it takes proving it wasn't a mistake." He looked at her then, not the CEO, not the disguise, but the person beneath all of it. "Tired, grounded, human. You sleep here tonight," he said. "That's all I can promise." She didn't argue. She nodded, grateful. In the morning, Lila ran from the shelter barefoot, blinking against the glare, and froze when she saw Nyx leaning beside the water tank, arms crossed. Then she sprinted. Nyx dropped to one knee just in time for the child to barrel into her, arms tight, laughter cracking into a sob. "You came back," Lila said against her shoulder. "I did," Nyx murmured. "I told you I would if I could." Jack watched them from the bay entrance, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but softer than it had been in months. That day, Nyx didn't speak much. She helped organize tools, fetched coolant from the stock crates, asked about new parts like she'd never left. Customers came and went. None recognized her, or if they did, said nothing. Jack didn't ask her to leave. That night, after Lila had gone to bed and the fire crackled again beneath the same unchanging stars, Jack handed Nyx a wrench. "You want to be useful?" he asked. She took it. He pointed toward a land speeder with a burnt-out grav stanchion. "It needs someone who knows how to listen." She knelt beside the engine housing, sleeves rolled up, hair smudged with grease. She smiled, wide and real. And Jack, for the first time in too long, let himself believe that beginnings had come after endings, and that maybe, just maybe, home was a place built from second chances. Above them, the stars turned on, no longer cold, no longer out of reach.